Hey, welcome to the first anticipated releases of 2024. If you haven't been here before, my name is Melody. I talk about books. Big shocker, I know. If you have been, welcome back. And also, do you remember how kind of light December was in terms of new releases and how we got a kind of reprieve from the mountains and mountains of new titles that we had been getting previously? Well, January is going to be nothing like that. We have 5 new release Tuesdays, over 30 new books, and as usual, I'm not even talking about all of them. I'm purposely leaving St. Martin's Press off of the list due to the promotional boycott, but any other titles you are personally excited about that I haven't mentioned by accident, let me know, or let me know what you're excited about in general as we jump into a brand new year of reading with a lot of exciting things on the horizon. So with that being said, let's look forward to today as of this posting and the first new release Tuesday of the year. First off, it wouldn't be an anticipated release video for me at least if we didn't have a sequel to a book I haven't actually gotten to yet, right? Like that's just the name of the game. So let's start the year off right with a sequel to a book I actually haven't gotten to yet, and I am going to have to read this off because for some reason the title is just refusing to stick in my brain, but it is Dark Star Burning, Ash Falls White, and this is the sequel to last year's fantasy, Song Like Silver, Flame Like Night, which to my understanding is a kind of mythological epic fantasy series, so I'm very much looking forward to it. I just haven't gotten to it yet. But if you've read the first book, let me know, and let me know if you are anticipating this sequel as well based on that. And then we have a middle grade graphic novel that feels a little bit Ghostbusters and a little bit supernatural, Ghost Roast by Shawnee Gibson and illustrated by Emily Cannon. This follows a protagonist whose father is a paranormal removal expert in New Orleans, but the twist is she can actually see ghosts, and this ability complicates things when she can actually see the spirit in the house her father has been hired to exorcise, and she has to then rescue this spirit. So this just looks fun. I am a sucker for a narrative where our protagonist can see the dead and just how that is utilized. I've loved it just off the top of my head from authors like Maureen Johnson, V.E. Schwab, and Justina Ireland. So I'm clearly drawn to this in the middle grade format as well, not even counting when I was actually a middle grade reader, and I'm very excited to see what the graphic novel format brings to this and how it's illustrated and how the ghosts come to life on the page. So excited to see what this is, the tone of it. It feels like based on the title, it's going to have a little bit of humor to it, and I'm just excited to see what we get here. And then one more title for the second. They're starting us off easy, but another title I'm going to have to read off because it is a nonfiction, and it is How to Be a Renaissance Woman, The Untold History of Beauty and Female Creativity by Jill Burke. And so this is going to be looking at kind of the narratives around the Renaissance and how beauty and the art culture of the Renaissance interacted. I also think it's going to be exploring the idea of power through beauty as well as colonialism through the representation of kind of standardized beauty in art. And so I'm very interested to see what perspective this offers, especially as it seems like it's going to be digging in to primary resources related to how women talk to each other about beauty. These are the kind of social histories I'm really interested in, and can you imagine how things like, I don't know, beauty subreddits will read to future generations and how that will really distill parts of our culture? Like, do we have a future where beauty YouTube is dug into as representative of the zeitgeist? That's something we won't know for a while, but is something fascinating to ponder. So in the meantime, I'm really excited to look at histories through lenses that I find particularly interesting, but have historically been kind of minimized. Moving on to January 9th, we have Come and Get It by Kylie Reed, which is the anticipated sophomore novel from the author of Such a Fun Age, which was a huge debut. Now, looking into some of the early buzz of this book, it does seem somewhat mixed. I mean, you do have to take everything with a grain of salt because it's Goodreads rankings, but it seems like it's going to be much more of a character-driven novel than a plot-driven novel. And Such a Fun Age, though it has been a second since I've read it, has an explosive inciting incident, but then I would argue it very much does become a character study in a lot of ways and a kind of cultural study. And so this seems, based on the reviews, like it very much is a more character-driven novel. And the critiques that I read of early reviews said that nothing was happening. So if you need a really propulsive, plot-driven novel, this may not be yours, but I just am intrigued to see what we're going to get from a sophomore novel here. It follows a resident assistant or an RA at a college as she becomes involved with a professor and some presumably business he gets her entangled in, but it doesn't really tell us more than that from the blurb, or at least what I interpreted from the blurb, though my mind is making jumps and telling me that there's probably something not completely on the up and up about whatever this venture is. Or maybe I just inherently distrust the word hustle now, which is used in the blurb, but this enterprise becomes further complicated by relationships of people in the dorm and college life and this and that and the other. The blurb also does make note that this is set in 2017, so I am interested to know what particularly about college life in 2017 we are exploring here, because it is far enough after I graduated from college that it's probably not going to be completely reflective of my collegiate experience, but also current enough that it will feel familiar. So what about it? I don't know what kind of commentary on the current moment it will have, but very interested to see what this is going to be and where she is taking her voice after such a big debut. Because I would argue, not that I think that people would be arguing with me, that it is really hard to follow up a debut that is that big. So just very interested to see what this is going to be, and also just to honestly figure out what the pig on the cover means. And then moving on, we have The Ladies Rewrite the Rules by Suzanne Elaine, who is the author of Mr. Malcolm's List. And if you have been here with me for a second, you know I did not like that novel. Like, really did not like that novel. So you're like, Melody, why is this book here? One, the cover is great. I fell for the cover. But two, I like the premise of it, so I want it to be good. It is about a widow who does not have any aspirations of getting remarried. And then she finds out she is on this list that has been put together by this gentleman of wealthy women that is basically helping fortune hunters and second sons. And so the women find out about this list. She tries to confront him and get him to do away with the list. He does not agree. Sparks fly. He's apparently more attractive than she anticipated, because of course, but she informs other women of this list so that they are not tricked falsely into marriage by fortune hunters, and then they have more power on the marriage mart. And so a comedy of manners, I'm assuming to some degree, a romance, and I'm just hopeful that the prose is more elevated than Mr. Malcolm's List. Now, I think it's also important to go in knowing what you're getting, at least with Mr. Malcolm's List, because that's the only one I've read. It will be framed as a historical romance, and I am a historical romance reader. I love historical romance, but it almost feels more of a historical romance that is a slight parody of like Jane Austen. It feels much more like it wants to live in the Austen realm, which is not necessarily where a lot of historical romances today that I really gravitate to live. They may use that as a springboard, but it is a lot more modern in its language and its tone and its explorations. And I'm not saying that Jane Austen doesn't transcend because she's the blueprint, but I also don't really like pretending she is the be-all, end-all of historical romance, which often happens when those who don't like historical romance are critiquing the genre. And I am by no means saying you have to like historical romance with that. Absolutely not. But it is what it is. So anyway, long story short, I'm still very intrigued by this concept. The cover is gorgeous, and I have hopes that this will really hit the spot for me. I want to like this, and I'm just hoping the language, the pacing, the tone of everything works a little better for me here. There was a glibness to the first book. I think it was going for wry, but I just didn't feel connected to the characters at all. It felt a little snarky without emotionally investing me, and everything moved just way too quickly. So I promise I'm going into this wanting to like it. I'm not just trying to blast that book, but definitely have it on my radar. And I think following the success of the movie Mr. Malcolm's List, which I did enjoy, I think that there will be interest here. So very excited to see what the reception of this book is. And then for my gothic romance fans, hey, that's me, The Djinn Waits 100 Years by Shubnam Khan. I am so excited for this. It looks really good. It's blurbed as kind of a Rebecca, but it follows a young woman who moves moved to this once grand estate in South Africa with her father, and it feels haunted. There is a sense of a haunting here, though not your kind of traditional haunting, but just the gothic haunting. You know. And so she finds herself drawn to the history of the house and uncovers this lost love story of Mina, who lived in the house 100 years ago and died tragically. And so we will presumably learn more about that, as well as the djinn following our protagonist Santa around that she can't see, and how this djinn, I assume, may be connected to this love story. We know I love a gothic, we know I love an atmospheric house, so I am very much anticipating this one. And then Poor Dear by Claire Oshetsky. This is going to be, to my interpretation of the blurb, a dark, sad book. So I cannot promise when I'm going to get to it. And you might be like, Melody, why do you want to read just a dark, sad book? Listen, I have not always made the best life choices. I did read A Little Life. It did mess me up. This may also mess me up, I don't know. But I am drawn to the idea of this kind of fairy tale-esque nature to it, to lyricism in it, and this idea of it dealing with a tragedy related to a little girl whose best friend had died, and how this little girl may have been involved. The blurb doesn't tell us. Like, we don't know how involved this little girl was, what happened, but there is this idea that there is some kind of storytelling going on from the girl that is helping her kind of distance herself from that, and that a magical type creature appears that in some way helps her process this traumatic event. So it does seem like it's going to be exploring storytelling as a way to make sense of hard things. Additionally, it is only listed on Goodreads at 240 pages. So while I do think it's going to pack a punch from what I've seen, it does seem like, one, the kind of setup of the narrative is probably going to offer us as readers a little bit of distance as well. I'm sure when we get to the climax, it will hurt, but it feels like it's going to be kind of layered in a little bit of like a soft blanket. It's going to be wrapped. There was a metaphor that I have the sense of in my head that just isn't making sense in words, but because it's shorter, it will be, one, yes, it will be more intentional, ideally, but it's not going to drag anything out necessarily. So I think that in some ways it might feel safer because of that. I don't know what I'm getting at. It looks intriguing. I'm intrigued by the idea of the kind of fairy tales to kind of mask this tragedy. We'll see what we get here. And then we have Sanctuary of the Shadow by Aurora Asher. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know if I'm interested in this or not, but I'm intrigued because it is out of Red Tower, and I did not have Red Tower on my radar at all until last year with some of its big titles like Fourth Wing and Assistant to the Villain, which I haven't read, both of which have been incredibly divisive for readers. A lot of people either really love them or really do not love them. And based on the rating so far on this for Goodreads, we may be leaning toward the latter here, and the blurb doesn't give us a whole lot to work with. It doesn't feel super specific. The blurb does seem to be playing into a lot of fantasy romance archetypes without really saying anything tangible or specific. It does have this sense of maybe we are set in a circus, which does make sense. There is a circus tent on the cover. I'm unsure if this is aiming to be like a young adult romance version of the Night Circus maybe, or if it's going to lean more into the Fallen era of young adult romance. Spoiler alert, I really did not like Fallen. Granted, I read it when I was too old for it. Like, it came out when I was older and it just didn't appeal to me, but it didn't appeal to me. So I'll be interested to see more if this blows up and what the conversation around this book is as much as anything. I am not saying I'm not interested at all, because there are intriguing bits here in this blurb, but they're written just vague enough that I'm like, are we just kind of writing vaguely about these tropes? And is that how the narrative is going to be? Or are we trying to talk around something so we don't give something away? I don't know. So if you've read this, I want to know your thoughts. And then we have You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrique, translated by Natasha Wimmer. This to me as a reader is particularly exciting because this author's novel Sudden Death lives in the same realm to me in terms of discovery and just kind of what the book is in my head as discovering things like Samantha Schweblin and Mariana Enriquez, that kind of oddness, much more in line with Samantha Schweblin's Fever Dream, which I still don't really understand fully to this day. And Sudden Death, I don't remember fully understanding to this day. And I really should revisit that book. What I remember is Anne Boleyn and tennis. But my review of it says, I'm not going to even pretend I understood all of what I just read, but it was a wild ride. I loved the voice, the look at history was weird and absurd, and there was all kinds of breaking of the fourth wall. I'm too tired to think of corresponding literary phrases right now. This was odd and I enjoyed it, but also really have no frame of reference with which to compare it. Which at the time, March of 2016, absolutely true, still true to some extent, but this novel also seems to be a twisted and absurdist look at history, this time looking at Hernán Cortés and colonialism through an alternative history lens. So very, very interested. Very interested to see if it's going to be tonally similar to Sudden Death, but mostly excited to have something new from this author. If there has been something since Sudden Death translated into English that I completely missed, let me know, because I would like to circle back and read that as well. And then moving on to the 16th, we have The Fury by Alex Michaelides. This is the author of The Silent Patient. The Silent Patient, I didn't hate, but wasn't necessarily for me. It felt very Alias Grace-esque in a time where I was already kind of living mentally in that world because I was working on the stage production, but it didn't complicate the male point of view in that like we see kind of engaged with in Alias Grace. So I think it was interested in having that conversation. I don't know if it fully succeeded. That being said, it also credited things like Alias Grace in its notes, so I'm not trying to say it's like copying Alias Grace by any means, but this is an incredibly popular author, and so I know this book will be highly anticipated, and it's a thriller regarding an infamous murder case involving an ex-movie star and a remote island that has lived in infamy in some way and complicating what we presumably know about that case. It's a fictional case, but still. So it seems like it is returning to this idea like with The Silent Patient, and again, that's the only book I've read by him, so that's my only frame of reference, where we are complicating what we know about something, the narrative that has been told. So I'm still very interested in this idea, and he is a popular enough author that I am tempted to give this another go. I have been kind of out of the thriller game for a while, so my palette may be suitably cleansed. If I did this in any format, I think I would do this in audio. But let me know if you are really a fan of these authors' books and if you think I should pick this one up. And then we are returning to the highly anticipated world of Emily Wilde and Bamblebee with Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. This is definitely anticipated after the incredible success of Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies last year. I'm very much looking forward to this. I definitely think this will appeal to fans of the Victoria Speedwell series with a supernatural twist. I like that Bamblebee feels a little bit Oscar Wilde. This book, presumably, according to the blurb, has assassins after Bamblebee, and so we are presumably going to be pulled more into the politics of the fairy realms here, and we'll also see, at least I hope, according to what the blurb has set out, more of the kind of university politics that Emily Wilde and Bamblebee engage in within that world, because we were seeing them removed from that in the first book. And so I'm excited to see the world kind of expand here and what we're going to get. There is a delicious kind of balance of darkness and light to the first novel that I hope we really see continue here, and I'm interested to see what the pacing of this is going to look like, how we're going to kind of pace the rest of the series, what the kind of scope of what else we're going to get here looks like. And it does look here like we are going to be moving to a new country in this book, so it seems to be setting up that idea that we're going to get to explore the kind of myths of the Fae in different cultures, which I'm really excited about. And then staying in the world of the Fae, though a different tone presumably in this series, based on the blurb, I'm feeling a little bit more Cruel Prince vibes from this one, but Faebound by Sarah El Arifi, the author of The Final Strife, which I still need to get to, but this follows a couple of elven sisters, one of which is a member of the elven army, and after a mistake they are exiled from elven lands into the vast wilderness, where they stumble across the Fae court that hasn't been seen for a millennium and are soon engaged in the seductive politics of this world. And so I'm very interested to see what the realm of the court is going to be here. I am a sucker for an interesting Fae court, back to my own young adult days with things like Wicked Lovely. This feels like it's going to be a little bit more of a grown-up take on that, but I'm very excited. And then continuing Macmillan's Classics Remix series, we have Most Ardently by Gabe Cole-Novoa. This is a trans Pride and Prejudice reimagining. It does not seem like it's going to be following the text beat for beat, because the blurb talks about our protagonist Oliver encountering Darcy when out and about as Oliver versus Elizabeth as he is known by his family, and just the difference of interaction between the two of them based on that, and getting to know each other more intimately that way and kind of breaking down Darcy's barriers. So it is going to be a much different look at these characters. And so in a world of plentiful Pride and Prejudice reimaginings, I'm very excited for this because it does seem like it's going to offer a new angle and perspective, and like I said, not be just a traditional beat for beat retelling. I'm not saying the beat for beat retellings are always bad if they're interesting enough, but I'm very excited to see where Novoa is going to put his own spin on this and really take ownership of the story and the text in a way that I think is really important for imaginings like this. So very excited to see what we're going to get here after having read Novoa's book from this year that I very much enjoyed. And then we have The Longest Autumn by Amy Avery, which is a debut, so I don't know much about what to expect in terms of the voice and the tone, but it follows a young woman who is one of 4 humans that have been selected to help usher in the seasons via these gods coming into the mortal realm, and she is in charge of Autumn, and then something happens and Autumn gets stuck in the mortal realm and the complications that arise from that. It's being billed as for fans of Ariadne, which I do find interesting because I personally didn't love Ariadne, but it does seem to be leaning into those kind of tones of myth and retelling, though I don't know that this is really pulling from a specific myth to my knowledge, and my knowledge, to be fair, is somewhat limited. So let me know what myth you think this is pulling from if you are familiar, but I do like narratives that have that feel of a fairy tale or a myth to them if executed well. So I am very excited to see what this is going to be and cross my fingers that this is executed well and hits all the right spots there. And then we have Maud Horton's Glorious Revenge by Lizzie Pook, which follows a young woman seeking answers in the mysterious death of her sister, which she does not believe was accidental on this Arctic expedition that her sister disappeared on. And so in seeking justice for her sister, she tracks down the scientist from this expedition and follows him as he is now kind of running tours of public hangings. And so this feels like it's really going to have that delicious juxtaposition from Victorian settings of kind of the idea of science and modernity kind of juxtaposed against the earthier, kind of more morbid kind of fascinations and how those link. I don't know why, because I don't think they're at all related, but I'm getting kind of thematic similarities to Things in Jars by Jess Kidd, which is still one of my favorite Jess Kidd novels. But I also have my eye on this book because of the Arctic expedition element. I am wondering, because I do think that the sisters' journals are going to come into play, if there is suitable boat book energy to be suggested for my book club, because we do love a boat book. And we also love Jess Kidd, so this could be a winner depending on how it plays out, especially because I do think this is a paperback first release. And I don't know about your book club, but we do try to read paperback in case we can't all get it from the library. So this is something I definitely will be checking out. And then we have Witchcraft, A History in 13 Trials by Marianne Gibson. I do believe this was released in the UK last year, but this is the US release. I am very interested in historical analysis of witch trials. I already have the Penguin Book of Witches, which pulls some pieces of primary documents related to witch trials, and this seems like it's going to be more of a succinct summation of different witch trials throughout history. And based on the blurb, I don't get the sense that it is going to talk about the Salem witch trials. It may, I don't know, but I like the idea that we're going to be getting a more wide-swept, a wider sense of the conversation around witch trials historically and just kind of culturally and politically what it has looked like. And then Escaping Mr. Rochester by L.L. McKinney. This is a young adult that seems to be exactly what it sounds like, a reimagining of Jane Eyre, where we do not trust Mr. Rochester and we complicate that character and the character of Jane and the character of Bertha, and how Jane and Bertha work together to escape a not so great situation for the both of them. So very interested in what twist this offers to Jane Eyre and whether it's a kind of young adult Wide Sargasso Sea. And speaking of a young adult Wide Sargasso Sea, next we have Not Quite a Ghost by Anne Ursu, which I think based on the blurb may be a middle grade, The Yellow Wallpaper. I mean, read the last part of this blurb and tell me you don't think of The Yellow Wallpaper. It talks about yellow wallpaper, it talks about forms moving in the yellow wallpaper, pretty yellow wallpapery to me, but it also seems to explore a protagonist who is dealing with a lot of change in her life, including moving to a new house and a troubled friendship with a best friend who seems to be moving on from her, which I think is something that a lot of young people, especially young girls, can relate to, and the pain of those kind of shifting friendships at this time. And so this idea that she is going through a lot of transition and then she falls ill and is trapped in this room with this yellow wallpaper. So very, very intrigued by this and what this is going to be. It also, you know, kind of evokes the idea of ghosts because of the title. And I do, as previously mentioned, really respond to ghosts in middle grade. I'm very intrigued by ghosts in middle grade. So interested to see if that makes its way into this as well. And then we have Midnight Ruin by Katie Robert. This is the 6th in the Dark Olympus series. I am behind. I still need to finish book 5, but this is the Orpheus and Eurydice book, throwing in Charon as well. So very interested, especially because as of my reading so far of the rest of the series, not counting book 5, I don't really have a real reason to be rooting for Orpheus and Eurydice as a couple. So very interested to see how we're going to shift my perspective there, if we will shift my perspective there. I don't know that I'm particularly excited for this couple, but I'm excited to see where the series continues to go. At this point, I kind of feel like I'm holding out for Zeus and Hera's book, but we'll see. And then we have The Bullet Swallower by Elizabeth Gonzalez James. This is a kind of intergenerational family saga that is right up my alley as someone who doesn't traditionally gravitate to intergenerational family sagas. Based on this line from the blurb particularly, the Bullet Swallower follows a Mexican bandido as he sets off for Texas to save his family, only to encounter a mysterious figure who has come finally to collect a cosmic debt generations in the making. And so we start at the end of the 19th century with a train robbery that goes wrong, and then we move to the 60s with a renowned Mexican actor and singer who is rediscovering this family legacy and also may have an encounter of his own with this mysterious figure. And so the mysterious figure is really doing a lot of work for me in terms of my interest, and I'm very excited to see how this kind of all ties together. And then we have Womb City by Tlotlo Tomasi. I don't know what to expect from this book, but it feels just weird and dark enough that I am intrigued. It seems like it is a futuristic dystopian horror novel about a woman who seems to have it all and does not, in a world where the patriarchy is heavily present. And after a night that involves a hit and run, there may be an additional crime that takes place, and then how that doesn't seem to rest after the fact. And so I'm just very intrigued by what the world of this is going to look like. And it seems like there are very complicated, flawed characters at the center of this and a very complicated, flawed system. So just what the commentary is going to be, it feels odd enough that I am intrigued, because generally this is the kind of dystopia that I might not really be drawn to. So I don't know how high up my list it's going to be. And there are some elements, especially with the addition of what seems to be some kind of like speculative horror, and I'm intrigued by how that is going to change the tenor of the world. So I don't know, we'll see. I'm going to be paying very close attention to reviews on this one for sure. And then The Fake Dating Game by Timothy Janowski, which is a contemporary rom-com, seemingly, which involves our protagonist Holden, who fake dates the hotel concierge in order to have a more interesting story, in order to get on to his favorite game show, Madcap Market, which feels like Supermarket Sweep. And Supermarket Sweep is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in my interest here. It's clearly going to have to be more drawn out than Supermarket Sweep in terms of how how long they have to keep this going, potentially. I am a little bit reserved because Holden does feel like he's going to be a little bit of a mess as a protagonist, and I feel like I already got that with You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince from last year, but I am still intrigued and want to give this a shot to see what we're gonna get here. And then Martyr with an exclamation point, like in High School Musical by Kaba Akbar. I have been seeing a lot of buzz around this in the sense that I've been seeing this cover a lot, but I don't know that I can really distill what I think this novel is about succinctly. It seems to be one of those kind of wide-sweeping meaning of life novels in some ways, in which our protagonist, who is battling demons of his own in regards to things like addiction, is also re-examining his family legacy and things like the tragedy involving his mother being shot down in a plane over Tehran, and maybe that being more complicated of a legacy than he originally thought, and just the kind of systems in place in his life in a lot of ways. So our protagonist seems to develop an obsession of sorts with martyrs, and I assume that is the larger exploration of this book, the idea of martyrdom, especially within the kind of modern world, and if that is a different and more complicated exploration than we may generally think of it. But I haven't read the book, so I don't really know. I am just seeing it get a lot of buzz. I'm intrigued, and I'll be interested to see if the buzz sustains itself as well and continues throughout the year. So this is one I'm keeping my eye on from the literary side of things for sure. And then Never Blow a Kiss by Lindsay Lovis is about a woman escaping a dark past through a new life as a governess, though she ends up getting entangled in some light spying, maybe some heavy spying, I don't know. And this is how she crosses paths with our hero Zach, who is a new railroad magnate, which has opened up new doors of society to him, but he also hunts killers on the side. I don't know. So we'll see how these two's paths cross, how feelings become involved, and what secrets they are keeping and how they may be in conflict, or maybe they're actually working toward a common goal. I guess we'll have to tune in to see how twisted and convoluted this romance ends up being. But one thing I'm willing to bet is that they get a happily ever after. And then we have another dystopia, this time young adult, also billed as a retelling of Treasure Island, Into the Sunken City by Dinesh Thuru. I have not read Treasure Island, so I will definitely not catch all of the references in here, but it involves two sisters who become part of a crew to go on a dive to a sunken Las Vegas in search of lost gold, complicated by the fact that their father had died in an unsuccessful dive. And so there is a lot of tension there because one of the sisters was not necessarily on board with this. So interested particularly in the world that is being created here, and this presumably is a kind of climate change dystopia. So I'm not sure. I generally don't gravitate toward those because my anxiety is what it is already, but I am very intrigued by the world here, so we'll see. And then Her Adventures in Temptation by Megan Frampton, and this is a historical romance that involves a fake engagement, complicated by the fact that real feelings develop when they had both agreed that their engagement would be called off at the end of the season, and how that changes things. So interested to see what scenario forces them into this engagement, because it involves a scandalous hero who is doing a favor for this lady who needs to get to London. So why does she need to get to London? Why is he scandalous, though the blurb says he's also secretly soft-hearted? So many questions that reading the book will answer. And then The Summer Queen by Rochelle Hassan. This is the sequel to The Buried and the Bound, and that is about all I have to offer, because you didn't think I was only going to have one sequel that I was anticipating for a first book I haven't yet read, did you? So very intrigued. To my understanding, this is a young adult new exploration of the Fae, which is something I am clearly drawn to. So if you've read this, let me know what you thought. And then we have Toxic Women, Fame, and the Tabloid 2000s by Sarah Didham. This is a nonfiction exploring tabloid culture of the 2000s. I was a teen in the 2000s. I am very interested in kind of re-exploring this time and the conversations we had, particularly about women in the tabloids at the time, and how that has impacted both the culture and millennial women today. So presumably that will all be touched on in here through, I believe, case studies of 6 different women from different professions and avenues and how they were treated by the tabloids. And with that, we are to January 30th. Let's do this, starting off with one of my most anticipated of the month, The Invocations by Crystal Sutherland. This is the first we're seeing from her since House of Hollow, which was phenomenal and one of my early Feature Fridays, if you want to go back, and really shifted her tonally from her early work like Our Chemical Hearts in a really interesting way. And this new book seems to be kind of leaning into that tonal shift. It also seems to be dark and dealing with bonds between women and kind of dark deals and this kind of magical realm. I am suitably intrigued. I am sure we'll talk about this book more, but from what I have gathered from the blurb, it seems to follow these young women who have made a kind of magical deal and now are watching as other people who have made magical deals with this woman are turning up dead. And so now they have to hunt down this killer. So magic, murder, witchy coven vibes, very intrigued here. And then we have another nonfiction title I'm going to have to read out to you, Be a Revolution, How Everyday People Are Fighting Oppression and Changing the World and How You Can Too by Ijoma Oluo. I've read her other books, Mediocre, So You Want to Talk About Race, and enjoyed them both. And I think this is going to be very much what it says on the tin, but I'm very interested in how the conversation is going to be approached here and have not been let down by her work yet. So I'm excited to see what this is going to be. And then because I'm trying to become at least a little bit more knowledgeable about poetry, I'm not pretending I'm even close to being to a place where I can accurately kind of converse about poetry, but this is Honey, an anthology of contemporary Black poets edited by Kwame Alexander. Feels like it's going to be a great place to start in terms of anthologies and having a lot of different voices in one central place, especially because I am familiar with Kwame Alexander and his voice, and so I trust what he's going to compile here, and it feels like it will be a great place to kind of become exposed to a lot of different poets. So excited to see this and get that familiarity and to continue to grow my vocabulary in terms of conversing about poetry. I want to be clear that I paid attention in English class in high school, but poetry just is a whole different conversation from prose. So excited to continue to explore that world through this anthology. And then we have The Dark Fable by Catherine Harbour, which is a young adult blurb for fans of Six of Crows. It involves a protagonist who gets caught up in a heist, and then she is brought into this group called the Dark Fable due to her powers to turn invisible. And so now she's involved with this group of thieves that are known for stealing occult artifacts, but the group may be more involved in her own history than she knew. And then finally, we have the debut How We Named the Stars by Andres Ordorica, which is a literary novel following a young man who is going away to college and is kind of bearing all of the hopes and dreams of his family. And he's kind of trying to grapple with that as well as being named after a late uncle and feels really out of place and is struggling until he really connects with his roommate and they fall in love. But after a tragic loss, he finds himself in his ancestral home of Mexico, grappling with grief and learning more about himself and the late uncle he was named after. And so this feels like it's going to be a heavier novel. It's going to be sad, but it also talks about redemption. And so we have this idea of hope at the end. So I'm just interested in what this is going to say about grief and love and family and what the voice is going to look like. And with that, we have finished January and we are just at the start of another year of way too many books to add to the TBR. So let me know what you are adding to yours out of today or what I've missed that you are also going to be looking forward to in January. If there are any of these books that you'd really like to see featured in a Feature Friday, let me know. No promises, but we'll see where the year leads us. So yeah, happy new year of reading. I hope everyone is off to a great start, finding fantastic stories. Thank you as always for hanging out and being interested at all in what I have to say about books. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good, and yeah, bye.